He said, I have walked through many lives, some of them my own, and I am not who I was, though some principle abides from which I struggle not to stray. Today I want to talk about the fifth and sixth principle, or source of faith that we have in our Unitarian Universalist faith. I want to review a couple things that I've talked about before because I think they're important to definitions. But keeping that in mind, that we are not who we were, but there's some principle that abides, is the story of Unitarian Universalism. The fifth source we articulate, and you can see in your hymnals at the front of the hymnals, there's a little list of the six sources underneath our principles. The fifth one has to do with humanism, a word that doesn't cross the lips in friendly tones by too many religious people. But for us it is important because it indicates a struggle, a clarity of thought that comes and has come over the past 150 years between religion and science. Religion and science. And the sixth one, source, has to do with earth-centered religion. Has to do with becoming aware that the earth itself is our home. From the moment we began to see the planet floating in space, the world changed. And our Unitarian Universalism has also changed as a result of that awakening. An awakening that the earth, discovering or rediscovering Native Americans, paganism, discovering that those who worship Mother Goddess of the earth were trying to do the same things that those who worshiped in church were trying to do. To find their ethical center, to find their ground of being. Last week I talked about definitions. I talked about the definitions that I found in Merriam-Webster's dictionary. And the first one that has to do with defining faith, it says it's about a promise. It says it's about a loyalty. It says it's about an intentionality. All of those I apply to life, and I come up with religion. The second one is the more common definition of faith. And that has to do with a belief in a doctrine, in a creed, in a church. Faith also means this, your promise to live life. And this I shared at the other services. I want to just mention it again. William James, the great philosopher and writer who wrote a book at the turn of the 20th century called Varieties of Religious Experience, looked at religion as a phenomenon, and he concluded that the sense of life by virtue of which man, excuses his inappropriate language for today, does not destroy himself, but lives on. It is the force by which he lives. Faith is the force by which we live. Faith is that which awakens us to the possibilities of what it really means to be human. It's a powerful word. It doesn't have to necessarily conflict with science. And that's what I want to talk about. At the end of my message last week, I talked about a group of people who in 1893 brought people from around the world to something that was called the Parliament of Religions. And I mentioned this man, Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda was from India, a Hindu. And he came, and as I said, he turned that parliament on its head. Because everybody came to talk about their God. And as a Hindu, he could talk about our God. He could talk about the one. Life being one. Not needing a creation. Life continually being formed and reformed. The Brahman, the whole totality of it, and the Atman, the individual totality. It woke people up. And then it woke people up again around the world as he traveled. What I want to focus on today is starting is this man, Jenkins Lloyd Jones. He was among a group of Unitarians in Chicago that helped put together that parliament. Jones had fought in the Civil War. He was 19. He was in 11 battles. He was wounded. Maybe that's why at the end of his life he opposed the First World War so much. He was someone who had a passion for religion. And as he grew, that passion grew more universal. And he said that there has got to be a universal religion, or at least within all religions there's got to be some commonality. And this was linked with his deep desire for service. He founded a church in Chicago. The church grew, and it founded a Abraham Lincoln Center, which became renowned as one of the first prototypes of settlement work in poor communities. Jane Addams worked with him. There was a link. There were links to world religions. There was a link, as the Swami would have said, to science. I want to open up my people to the understandings and the wealth of science as well as the wealth of the West. There is this linkage between science as something which is a natural outgrowth of humankind that should be checked. We're already in the midst. What, I guess by the time he is in Chicago, it is some 40 to 50 years after Darwin. He's not concerned with debating whether Darwin contradicts the Bible. What he's concerned with is more of the soul of what science can reveal. Now, fast forward. We are not who we were. We're not yet who we're becoming. Fast forward, I just threw these names up because they're just to indicate that there's a historical moment at the beginning of the 20th century where these men were in a great debate within our movement. John Dietrich, who affirmed and said, you can have religion without God. Was that what the Swami was saying? I don't know. You can have religion without God, and we must always listen to reason, and we must be instructed by science. Well, there was another man named Charles Potter, and he was an expert that testified on the part of the defense at the Scopes trial. He was a biblical expert. He was another Unitarian minister. And then I put up here William Lawrence Sullivan. William Lawrence Sullivan at this time, 1920s, had just broken away from the Catholic Church. He had been a Paulist priest. He found the confines of the Catholic Church unbearable. He shows up in the Unitarian circles, serves a number of churches, and then he runs into those guys. This is not what he was up for. This is not why he was joining Unitarianism. He was joining Unitarianism because it was a more liberal orientation toward religion. He could take some of the teachings of his church and forbid them, which were at the time that you could not have a separation of church and state. Aha! The Pope was saying that. And modernism. The Pope was saying that. Sullivan didn't want any part of that. So he found freedom in the Unitarian Church, and then he runs into these guys who are saying, you don't have to have God? Crazy. Crazy. They had a debate. They thought in this debate in the 20s, those who were holding on to firmly exclusive Christianity as Unitarian Universalists, they thought they had the day one. Well, Sullivan, man I just showed you, got to speaking, and he had such vitriol and such hatred for those other two guys, where people were talking about religion without God, that he lost his audience. People said, we're not full of that kind of anger. We want something more accommodating. first, Jacob Lloyd-Jones, was someone who found in his work in Chicago and then in the West, he found a place for many different expressions, including, and would you believe this one, women. He said, we're going to ordain women, and we're going to send them out, and they're going to serve churches in the West. And he did. And they grew into what was known as the Iowa Sisterhood, and they had a fantastic effect. They were marginalized. They only could serve small churches. But they were powerful. He had opened up that door. And he was opening up this door of understanding of religion as something which is encompassing, does not have to be defining, and does not have to be in struggle with science. So, got that debate going on. And then comes a guy named Frederick May Elliott. He becomes the president of the Unitarian Association. And he says, this is ridiculous. We ought to be able to work this out. So I'm going to do this little history by hymnals. Real quick history by hymnals, because that's a few other things to say. He creates a hymnal. They create a hymnal. The Unitarians create a hymnal that accommodates humanism and Christianity. They can go side by side. In his book, he writes about that. He says we're all need to be together. And we can open up our doors to people of different faiths. This is in 1937. This is in 1964. That debate that I mentioned had been, in retrospect, won by the humanists. So by mid-century, this hymnal was created. Alan talks about it, having been raised with it. This is a hymnal that includes world religions, scriptures, does not include any standard order service like the other hymnals. It is a source of wealth of the human enterprise of religion, of how religion can be used to awaken the human spirit. And you may or you may not believe in God. We call it now, in the new hymnal, singing the living tradition. The tradition that says, and in this hymnal we see sources from world religions, we see sources from around the world. We draw upon them freely, and we ask each other questions which help each of us form our own faith. And what do? We covenant together. We say, we're in this business of trying to find out what life is about, what its meaning is, and how we can create and pass it on the better for our guardianship, to use some of the words of that John Dietrich humanist. He said, that's what the business of religion is about. A lot of correctives along the way to the strident humanism of the 20s, to a much more embracing nature and compassion in our present time. We are not who we were, but some principle abides from which we struggle not to stray. The sixth I want to talk about in a moment, after we sing this song. For the earth, whatever turning, comes out of that hymnal, our living tradition hymnal, and is a reflection of a different time and a different way of understanding the earth. So let us sing together. don't say that my scripture is good for you, then what is the center? The center is a process. The center is a covenant. The center is saying to one another, I see in you, I might call it God, but you might call it light. It says, seeing in you something that is special. I call it sacred. You call it sacred. It's seeing something emerging here that says to the world, in no uncertain terms, we are a community, a religious community, that believes that we can all live together. Theists, atheists, pagans, Buddhists, we can live together because there's something that unites us. You call it what you want to. You get in touch with it how you want to get in touch with it. And I'll do the same. But I'll treat you with respect, not tolerance. Nobody needs to be tolerant. I'll treat you with respect. I'll bow to the divine, you may not call it that, in you. That is a new message. That is the continuity that I think religions have had. And it's a new way of expressing it. But it comes out of a tradition, a living tradition that is always trying to find how do we find that which gives our lives meaning in a changing world. It'll be different for each of us. Earth-centeredness brings us all back. It's that wonderful song which is part of the Messiah Mass that was created by Paul Winter's group. And here in this sanctuary, or in this congregation, as in many Unitarian Universalist congregations, say about 20-some years ago, the women of religion, of the Unitarian movement, began to have a much stronger voice. Now, since then, women, have become over half of our clergy are women. Big change in a short period of time. Well, one of the starters of that was a little book called Cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And I know some of you who were around here 20 years ago participated in programs. We were talking about the goddess. It was okay. We can talk about the goddess. Or your definition of the goddess. Or your definition of the goddess. But there's a history there that can't be ignored. The goddess has been part of humankind, and worshipfully so, for millennia. The earth has been the center of worship. We're just trying to claim and get our hands around that one. It has not been long enough. And so in our sanctuary here, the winter solstice, we had our friends Laura Moondream and other First Nation people join us, as they have in the past several years, to celebrate the sacred as they see. And to embrace us and to teach us. Language aside, ritual aside, we share this one blue-green planet floating through casual space, as Maya Angelou said. Floating through casual space to a place we don't know where we're going. But in the words of one of our hymns, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. Deep inside, we know we're going to get there. But we know, unlike those early humanists, we've seen 2 world wars and the atomic bomb. Those humanists who were in debate with Paulus the priest, who was a Unitarian minister, they didn't know that. They hadn't experienced that horror. They had a positivism which we cannot bring to our consciousness because we've seen the horrors. Jacob Lloyd Jones saw the horrors of that Civil War. 600,000 killed. He got a glimpse of it. Those that followed him saw science as almost God. They needed a corrective. What's the corrective we need? We can't tell. We're muddling around, trying to find. But we do know this. As we say every Sunday here, love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, its service is its prayer. We can put a banner up as soon as it gets nice weather. It's in the back of the church. It says, standing on the side of love for justice and peace. Which is a rallying, also a cry for justice for immigrants, justice for all of those who are oppressed. That is the thick ethic that we have, that is at the center of our religion. And it is one that we can proudly say is our tradition. It's our tradition. Not any better than other people who are working for those same ends. In other churches, in synagogues, in temples, around the globe. But we're saying there's something that